The aim of this paper is to provide first a reconstruction of Marx's theory of public debt or fictitious capital in order to study the effects of the expansion of public debt, of the dynamics of income distribution, and second, to provide some suggestions for interpreting the Italian decline, the so-called Italian decline, from a Marxian theoretical standpoint, that is, using Marx. This is a very preliminary draft insofar as Marx devoted very little attention to the functions of the state. As you know, Engels developed these issues more intensely, and in more recent times little attention has been devoted to the issues on part of Marxist scholars. I will start with a recent and influential interpretation which has been provided by an American economist, Mickle, in 2009, where he maintains that in a classical Marxian theory of growth, public saving can increase capital accumulation in the long run because for two basic reasons. First, if capitalists expect an increase in taxation on profits, they reduce their current saving, thus reducing investment. In this theoretical framework, capitalist reaction is motivated by two assumptions. That is, first, capitalists are supposed to have an infinite horizon, and second, they say for dynastic motives, that is, to transfer resources to their offspring, according to an altruistic intergenerational attitude. The second motivation is that the increase of public debt is regarded by capitalists as net wealth. You remember that this proposition is similar to that of Barrow-Ricardo theorem. It will crowd out real capital in their portfolios and thus retard the accumulation of capital. Therefore, Mickle concludes that public debt has both a regressive effect on wealth distribution and reduces the growth rate. To me, this is not Marx. This is a line of thought which is very influential in the United States, which falls within the so-called rational choice Marxism or analytical Marxism, which is very far from Marx, from textual evidence, insofar as they pretend to reorganize, rationalize Marx's thought on the basis of micro-foundations, on the basis of utility function, on the basis of intertemporal optimization. On this, just for this reason, to me, this is not Marx, but there is another reason. On the basis of textual evidence, which I will not provide here, they are in the paper, this is not the whole story in Marx. I will show that Marx do not find a unique effect of the increase of public debt. I mean, there are several channels which the increase of public debt stimulates on economic growth, or capital accumulation, and income distribution. In particular, there are three channels. The first one is speculation, which has nothing to do with Mickle's assumption of the savings for dynastic motives. Marx argues that the increase in public debt encourages speculations on the part of capitalists, creating a class of, this is Marx's terminology, of financial aristocracy. Therefore, growing amounts of accumulated profits tend to be used for speculative activities, giving rise to the following effects. First, capitalist speculation reduces investment with a further redistributive effect or intra-capitalist conflict. That is, the increase in the supply of state bonds is allowed only for big corporations and give rise to a process of capital reproduction based on sequence M+, only for this part of capital, while the process of valorization via exploitation, the production process, mainly pertains to the other part of capital which are not involved in this game, which are not present in the financial markets. The increase in public debt, therefore, reflects and triggers inter-capitalist conflict between small firms and big corporations. Furthermore, an increase in public debt is associated to a crowding out effect at the expense of small capital or small firms, which becomes more vulnerable to the process of acquisitions on the part of big corporations. As a result, increases in public debt contribute to an increase in industrial concentration ratios, thus amplifying the tendency towards monopoly capital. That is, speculation, in a sense, which is produced by the increase of public debt via the emission of state bonds, does not pertain to the whole capital, but occurs only for big corporations which have access to financial markets and have sufficient money capital to acquire state bonds. The reduction of investment involves a reduction of employment, which, on the basis of the industrial reserve army effects, means a reduction of money wages. Wages fall not only because of the rise of the unemployment rate, but also because, insofar as fiscal policy reflects capitalists and workers bargaining power, I will repeat this story after, the increase in public debt implies increases in taxes on wages. This case represents the distributive conflict between financial aristocracy, which is the term of Marx, and labor. Therefore, disposable wages can drop even if the government taxes firms, since firms can offload taxes into prices, negatively affecting real wages. The second effect of an increase of public debt is an effect on aggregate money profits, in the sense that, in Marx's logic, an increase in net public expenditure which produces an increase in public debt serves for capital reproduction, in the sense that it allows capitalists to obtain increasing monetary profits. The rationale for this effect is to be traced in the fact that public expenditure, mainly in the form of increased unemployment in the public sector, increases both workers' consumption on the part of workers who are not hired by private capitalists, and the state's demand for goods to be employed within its administrative structure. Accordingly, it is an additional influx of money that expands the domestic market. To sum up, the basic idea is that public expenditure, the increase of net public expenditure, net of taxation, increase domestic demand, which involves an increase in money profits, mainly for firms which produce for internal markets. It is worth noting that, in line with Marx, public expenditure reduced the necessity for firms to contract debt with banks, insofar as it increases money revenues and consequently profits and internal funds, internal retentions on the part of firms. This relation states that increases in public debt expenditure redistribute income to the benefit of capitalists at the expense of banks. The rationale for this is that if public expenditure increases, which can imply an increase of public debt, this produces an increase in domestic demand. An increase in domestic demand, in turn, implies an increase of money profits for firms which operate on local markets. An increase of profits allows firms for a planned level of investment, allow firms to demand less credit to the banking system, generating an effect which is the exact opposite to the standard ISLM story, which is an increase of public expenditure may produce a decrease of the nominal interest rate. I repeat this passage. If public expenditure increase, this increases money profits. For a planned level of investment on the part of firms, this in turn involves that firms have less necessity to go in debt to banks. Therefore, firms' bargaining power in the market for credit increases, and banks are forced to lower the interest rate, which is, I repeat, the opposite of the standard story of the ISLM model. A further effect. Here Marx is not very clear, but some Marxists are clear. They maintain, Rothel in particular, that public intervention serves for supply, state finance, state provision. In other words, the state produces social services which workers can acquire at lower price than would be the case if they were produced by private firms. This is particularly so for public goods, which private firms do not find profitable to produce. Health services and education are the most significant examples. In view of this interpretation, public expenditure serves to implement a welfare state system which in turn serves for capitalist reproduction insofar as it increases surplus value quite independently of variation in technical composition of capital and or in prolonging the working day. In other words, according to this interpretation on Marx's theory of public debt, the increase of public expenditure and public debt, if it is devoted to expanding the welfare state, mainly by means of education and health services, produce an increase of labor productivity which is completely independent on what happens in the production process. That is, it is completely independent on what capitalists do. It is the state, according to this interpretation, which promotes directly an increase of productivity without efforts on the part of capitalists. That is, without a variation of the technical composition or organic composition of capital and or a variation of the working day. The basic idea of Marx, which I call fiscal exploitation, although the term is not in Marx, and maybe it should be reformulated into fiscal expropriation, is that economic policy is affected by the bargaining power of social classes with antagonistic interest. This could be a very trivial idea, but it is not so trivial if you know the so-called power sources theory. That is, the decision on the part of the government as regard to public transfer and taxation reflect the bargaining power of the agents, mainly in the labor market. So it may happen, as a general rule, that as unemployment is higher, when unemployment is higher, workers experience low bargaining power in the labor market. But also unions experience low bargaining power in social political arena. That is, public expenditure and the system of taxation reflects the bargaining power of capitalists, banks, workers in their markets, and particularly in the labor market. As regard to public debt, this general idea is confirmed by the fact that banks and capitalists are owners of the state bonds. First. Second, why this? This happens because workers who obtain at best a subsistence wage cannot buy state bonds. So only capitalists and big capitalists and banks can be creditors of the state. A demand arises. It is convenient for a government to tax its creditors. The answer is not, at least in a closed economy, in the sense that taxation on the creditors of the states would involve a reduction of the demand for state bonds. If this story is correct, the only social class which can be taxed are workers. Also because, if you read Marx in contemporary terms, also because even if capitalists are not creditors of the state, they can do the so-called capital strike. That is, they can threaten the government to postpone investment and or to delocalize. So there are at least two main reasons, if you accept this story, that make the government not convenient to tax its creditors, which are big corporations and banks. In order to repay debt, the state taxes the only subject which can be subject to taxation, that is, workers. As Marx points out, over taxation, this is the terminology, the term Marx uses, is not an accidental occurrence, but rather a principle. It is the best system for making the wage labor submissive, frugal, industrious, and overburdened with work. Therefore, fiscal exploitation, or if you want, fiscal exploitation, can be regarded as a tool aimed at increasing working hours and hence absolute surplus value. Note that what I name fiscal exploitation is a kind of exploitation which occurs outside the production process. The basic message of this story is that exploitation does not only occur in the production process. Workers are also exploited via the manipulation of fiscal policy, and particularly via the manipulation of public expenditure and taxation. And public debt is a powerful tool in order to increase taxation over the only subject which can be taxed, that is, labor. Moreover, a decline of wages below their subsistence level, suppose that the initial condition, that is, the condition before the increase of public debt, is a condition where workers are paid their subsistence wage. An increase of public debt, which involves a subsequent increase in taxation of labor, pushes down the unitary wage below its subsistence level. This involves, according to Marx, a deterioration of the quality of the workforce because of the less access to education, because of the non-access to health services, and as a result, a decline of future labor productivity. Marx approached this question with reference to the variations of absolute surplus value resulting from competitive pressures. Therefore, if the lengthening of the working day generates a deterioration of the quality of the workforce, which implies a reduction of labor productivity, why do capitalists find this strategy profitable, convenient? To Marx, it is competition among capitalists which produces this outcome, which, in a long-run perspective, damages capital as a whole. This is a case of lack of coordination in contemporary terms. That is, the individual capitalist is forced to increase surplus value to stay competitive, also using the taxing system or demanding an increase of the taxes on wages, while this strategy proves counterproductive once all capitalists behave this way. Note that an increase of public debt, which transfers into an increase of taxation on labor, implies an increase of working hours, a decrease of labor productivity, but also it may imply an increase in workers' indebtedness to bank. Starting from this picture, I will prove to provide a draft interpretation of the so-called Italian economic decline using Marx. empirical evidence is in the paper, in other materials I send you. In other, the story is in a nutshell this. Starting from the beginning of the 90s, Italy's public spending in relation to GDP was systematically lower than the average of industrialized countries. There was higher taxation, while public debt to GDP ratio was systematically higher. Italy also experienced the most severe reduction of the wage share in comparison with European countries and the greatest distributive inequalities of all OECD countries, with the USA and in part with England. Not that the reduction of the wage share is mainly imputed to the policy of the regulation of labor market. Cutting public spending and raising tax has not been a successful strategy in reducing the ratio of public debt to GDP, which has kept growing above all, if not exclusively, due to the high interest rate on government bonds. This is Graziani. In other words, the explosion of the Italian public debt, which, in brackets, is the explosion of public debt for all OECD countries, starting from the 80s and the 90s. In particular in Italy, the explosion of public debt was not due to the increase of public expenditure. Public expenditure is systematically lower than the average of the Eurozone. This is an interpretation made by Graziani and supported by evidence, by empirical evidence. Public expenditure, public debt in Italy, growth because of the increasing interest rate on state bonds, which, according to Graziani, was due to the fact that, due to the fragility of our industrial structure, Italy had to rebalance, to put in equilibrium the balance of payment in a condition where exports were lower than import, by attracting speculative movements of capital with higher interest rate on state bond. More recently, the increase of taxation, mainly on labor, resulted to repay the debt. This generated, and it is generating, a reduction of net real wages out of taxes, therefore a reduction of labor productivity and increase of working hours. This is a figure of OECD. The rate of growth in labor productivity in Italy is the lowest in the average of Eurozone, and more importantly, Italian workers have the longest working hours in the Eurozone after the Greece. The countries where the working hours are lower are Netherlands and Germany. The source is OECD this year. So, some hints, some suggestions from Marx derive in the sense that in countries where public debt is very high, take Italy and Greece into consideration, labor productivity is low, Marx. Working hours are high, Marx too. This implies a reduction of the rate of growth and increase of a constant increases of public debt to GDP ratio, giving rise and then I stop, to a phenomenon of redistribution of wealth in favor of financial rents, both Italian and international financial aristocracy, to use the Marxian terms, at expense of labor. Consider that the increase of taxation, the constant increase of taxation, starting from the 90s, is mainly levied on labor. So, these are the concluding remarks. I think that the most important with regard to the comparison of the influential book of Mikol and analytical Marxism is that there is no single effect to Marx deriving from the increase of public debt. There are many possible ways that the increase of public debt may generate capital accumulation and income distribution. And the Italian case appears to confirm Marx's theory that the increase of public debt reduces the rate of growth via the reduction of labor productivity and redistributes income at the benefits of financial aristocracy and at the expense of workers. Thank you.